All right, hello everyone, it's silverkyle, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which is book one of a fantasy trilogy called The Empire of the Wolf, and I very much enjoyed this book. It came at the right time for me. So this book came out last year, and we actually just got the sequel last month in the month of February, and I'm definitely looking forward to this one now that I finished this, especially the way that this ended. One of the best climaxes for any fantasy book that I've ever read. Richard Swan just nailed it. Anyway, what happened was I was reading a book and I was in the middle of it and it wasn't really catching my interest and I needed a break. So I said, okay, let's read The Justice of Kings, which is a fantasy novel. And I haven't read fantasy very much at all in the last decade. Like it's over the last 5 years, I don't think I read anything other than Lord of the Rings. So I dived into this and it was such a happy moment for me to be back in familiar grounds with fantasy novels. And this is awesome. If this is what modern fantasy is doing right now, I absolutely love this. So what happens in this story is that we've got this main character. Well, there's two main characters. There's Yelena, I can't remember what her name is or how it's pronounced, but she's the kind of going over her diary or her notes, and it's her first point. So it's her first point of view retelling of what has happened within this first novel here. And in those aspects, I generally don't like first person point of views. Like there's things in some ways where you can get a little bit more information, a little bit more detail, how this character is specifically feeling and on all that, which is good. But in that sense, I also feel like there's no danger for this main character. I generally feel that this character is going to be completely safe, and that might not be the case because you can still get around doing that, but I generally have a feeling that I don't like that, and I just like things to be able to flow without having a person's thoughts interjected and saying, oh, but this was what happened, but something else will change later on, and they give you little tidbits to kind of keep you going, which I understand what they're doing, but I never like that. I don't want any kind of foreshadowing unless that they curve and change some of the narrative to make you think that something's going to happen and then actually doesn't. That I like it. But straight up, this is potentially what's going to happen and then that happens, I don't like it. Anyway, not to say that any of this really happens in this book, but we have this character who's going along with this justice character. Now, justices in this world are essentially the judge, jury, and executioners of the law in this empire. And they're able to go around in the world and investigate every town and every city to make sure that they're still following the law and the religion that is deemed by this empire. And if they aren't, then the justice could find them or he could execute them. Whatever he deems is up to the law, he's able to do. And they also have specific ledgers to make sure that all of the information is going on correctly. They send all of their information for what they've done in specific cities and towns back to the main capital to make sure that everything that they've been doing is under the law as well. I really like that. The attention to detail that you basically have law and order back in medieval times, because it's fantasy, is very interesting to me. I like that quite a bit, and I wanted a little bit more of that. So we end up kind of getting a few little skirmishes that he goes in, not skirmishes, but we get a little bit of a taste of when he goes to a specific town and he decrees, okay, well, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is how I'm going to be dealing with the law over here. And you can kind of see that because he's been doing this for so long, he doesn't have bloodlust. He's not out there trying to execute as many people as he can. He's actually trying to do the least amount of that. If he only executes someone if he really feels it is necessary. And that I very much admired. The main Conrad Von Volt, I believe is how you pronounce it, is the justice, and he's kind of the main character along with Yelena. I can't remember how to pronounce it. And I very much enjoyed his character. He had a few flaws, but for the most part was really on this righteous path of what the law should be, for the most part. And I loved his character. The other character, Yelena, whatever her name is, she's kind of his apprentice. I can't remember what the term was. She's like his clerk or something. So she goes around and she writes down everything that's going on. She deals with a lot of the paperwork, essentially, the red tape that is involved back in these medieval times for this. love all of that. And she has to draw out like these contracts and everything. It's great. I really like that world building that they have in this with the justices. The justices also have specific kinds of magic that they can use that is kind of only known to them. So it's something that's really sought after, because if other people could learn how to use this magic that the justices have, then they could do completely horrible things. Like you to be a justice, you have to be someone that's somewhat trustworthy, and only a few people have this magic. So it's really wild that nobody else has it, and they really want it, right? So that's kind of does take place a little bit in this novel. I can't wait to see what's going to be happening afterwards, because some things went down. The ending is just absolutely fantastic. I loved this. But what I wanted was a little bit more, I think, of just going from town to town and seeing the characters kind of mesh together, and finding out a little bit more about how what kind of powers the justice has, how he deals with things. I really liked that. But then we get into a main investigation that kind of takes the majority of the novel. And then there's also another event that is happening at the same time that are kind of coinciding. So there's the investigation and the event that kind of takes place within this world that is nearing them. And that, I kind of feel like we flip-flop a little bit too much, and it took away a little bit of the investigation when we were dealing with the event, that where they just got kind of more information on what was going on, and then they came back to the investigation afterwards. And it took a little bit of the oomph that we had with the investigation going, because it was kind of like heading somewhere, then we had to take a pause, and it kind of slowed things down. I feel like almost the investigation should have been first. We could have heard about particularly things about the event, but nothing so drastic that they left to go and look at what was going on with this event, and then go back to the investigation. I think just take care of the investigation, hear about the things in the event, and then deal with part of the event near the end of the book. Or what I would have preferred is just learning more about the characters and having to go town to town. I would have enjoyed that as an introduction to this, and then deal with the other things afterwards in sequels. But either way, very much still enjoyed this. The only things that negative that I had, like I said, were as a little bit of the flow, but for the most part, I still very much enjoyed it. And the investigation and the event kind of, because that they take place at the same time, near the end, they start to coincide at the same time, and they work well together. So in that aspect, I really liked it. And then at the end, the climax of this was just excellent. It was nothing like the rest of the book. The rest of the book is very interesting, but there's so much chaos at the end. And I absolutely loved it. I couldn't get enough of that. It was done so well. And I was at the edge of my seat, and I rarely get like that in novels. Like edge of the seat, other than like a thriller where something might be crazy happening, for a fantasy book to get me like that, well done. I loved that part of the book. And Helena, the only other things that I would like to say though is her character is 19 years old, but she used to live on the streets, and she's been living or traveling with this justice for the past 2 years. So she should be a very hardened character. Like she sees executions every once in a while. She's seen dead bodies. Obviously she lived on the streets, so she was hardened from that from her first years when she was growing up. So this should be a very hard character. And she was very naive, and she was very moody all the time. And I'm like, this is not how you, it's weird, because I don't like a Mary Sue and I don't like a Gary Stu. I do not like characters with no flaws. They're extremely boring. I do not like them. But this character was the exact opposite of that, where that they had all the flaws and they were extremely almost annoying. And I feel like a 19-year-old that lived on the streets and has been with a justice for the past 2 years should not have been like that at all. She shouldn't have been necessarily as moody. It just seemed really off for the character that I thought she would have been. I still think that she can have specific moments where she is naive about like a certain aspect of life, and like dealing with a war, for example, or people trying to rob her is very different from people trying to kill her because that you're in the middle of a war, for example. So there's certain aspects that she could still be like, oh, I've never experienced this, and this is really messes me up. And we do have that within this novel, and I think those aspects I really like. But there's other times where it just really felt off. There's also like a romance aspect to this book, and the romance is done at such a juvenile level. Like, they kind of get together right away. Now, I know that romance in books is very hard to do. It's hard to do, I think, in any form of medium. But in this, it was just way too, no, that's not how relationships work, and that's not how love works. And granted, they're young, but it's not, and they do go afterwards, and they're like, maybe we jumped into this a little bit too fast, and that's okay. Good that they did that, but at the same time, they shouldn't have jumped into it that fast from the beginning. It was just, I think that the romance aspects could have been done a lot better, and it wasn't my taste. Either way, I've still very much enjoyed this. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I rated it up to 4 on Goodreads because it's definitely closer to a 4 than a 3, as there's a lot of good in this. It's just that it was bogged down a little bit with the main character being a little bit too moody. Why was she so moody? And another thing too, a lot of the male characters here are very, very angry and upset. And while this is a first person narrative, so things could be a little bit different because of that, and might explain why some of these things, because it's a retelling in a first person point of view. So I can understand maybe that's a little bit of what's going on here, but it took away a little bit of what I thought could have been a really outstanding novel. It's still really good, and there's a lot of good in this, and I cannot wait to dive into Tyranny of Faith to see if some of those problems will be fixed, because I think that what happened at the end of this book will really change a lot of the party going forward. So I'm very curious to see it. So 3.5 out of 5, 4 on Goodreads. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this, and if you read Tyranny of Faith as well. So thank you all for watching. You've been bearded in Beardage.